school. I like to think of it as mine. I've been here 20 years. We are in a busy part of Islington, and we converted to academy status in 2011. Larger than average, Ofsted would call us, 2 form-entry with 1 nursery, and we've got a higher than average SEND and higher than average pupils with English as an additional language, higher than average pupil premium, and also higher than average affluent population families. So we have a real mixture of in our sort of local community. There's lots of social housing, there's lots of multi-million-pound townhouses. So as I said, I've been at the school for 20 years. So during that time, I came as a class teacher. I've been the English subject lead several times. I've been the acting SENCo a few times. And just last November, I led the school to get the qualification for dyslexia friendly status from the British Dyslexia Association. And just as Katrina said, I've just finished the MA at UCL in SPLD. I don't consider that we have reached a point of excellence. So there might be lots of things that I say that you say, well, we do that, or we do that even better. We're still learning. As a school, we're still learning. I'm still learning, and I'm inspired constantly by hearing other professionals, like the people we've been hearing from this morning, and from my peers. And but this is really from a point of view of a mainstream primary school and how we do it and how it works here. Okay, so I'm going to talk first of all about identification, and then a little bit towards the end about screening, which has been covered quite a bit by our previous speakers. And so just a quick recap. So when we're talking about identifying dyslexia in children, what we're looking at is Rose's definition, which is now obviously 13 years old, but it's still widely accepted, widely used. And as it's been mentioned, it's very wordy. So, you know, the main points there I've put in bold for ease. And as was also mentioned, the BDA also have an addition, which is quite useful. I mean, I always think that the research is not definitive on some of the aspects, such as visual difficulties and how that might or might not tie in. But quite often I think of it as a personal preference for children. So a bit like with us really as adults. Some people have a preference to read a book, some people prefer a Kindle, some people like a hardback, a paperback. And it was quite interesting when we were on the beginning of our journey for dyslexia friendly status, and I introduced pastel coloured paper around the school, and actually the response was quite positive from staff who said it's so much easier to read things, you know, so non-dyslexic as well as dyslexic people saying how much nicer it felt. So you can imagine if you've already got difficulties reading, to see something on pastel paper that's more comfortable for some people might just make things a little bit more comfortable. The first thing I would say in our primary school, in a mainstream primary school, is having everybody prepared. And we've already heard a little bit about this, about staff training. And really, I suppose I consider myself as a bit of a champion for dyslexia friendly. So I'm constantly sort of trying to get it in one way or another. But then the enthusiasm kind of spreads, and you find out that, you know, a teaching assistant will come to me and say, oh, I've read this article about dyslexia, and they start sharing it amongst themselves. So those little things, I think, and helping to keep the profile high are very helpful. Specialist teacher, or maybe that you have a specialist teacher in your local education authority. We are very fortunate to now have 2 specialist teachers at the school. I know that not everybody's in that position, but there are some really useful helplines out there. So the BDA, the Head and have a helpline as well. So if you need support that's not readily available to you, that could be an option. Raising awareness as well for parents, and I'll talk a bit more about parents as we go through, and also with children, because this can help to destigmatise. Many children, many families who come into the school, they don't have a positive idea of what dyslexia is. Just an example, a couple of years ago, I led an assembly for our Key Stage 2 children on dyslexia, and one of the pupils who was not on our radar at all, she had great compensatory strategies, went home and said to her parents, you know, this is really resonating with me. I think I might be dyslexic. So we had a really careful look at her. We asked the BDA to come in and assess, and she actually has a diagnosis of dyslexia now. So a real example of a child thinking about their own learning with a high level of metacognition. Probably something to add to this would be the governing body also being aware and buying into this approach around being dyslexia friendly. Then everyone is aware of the signs. So just a little recap. Senior leadership team, including governing body. I think, you know, the senior leadership team, also it's important for them to be aware, and the governing body, of how this has an impact on the whole school, not just for children with dyslexia. So I've done quite a bit of work with our governing body on this, who felt that, well, you know, you're giving all this attention to children with dyslexia, and what about the children without dyslexia? You know, that's not fair on them. You're spending all your time on this, but actually reinforcing to them the impact on everybody else, and being made aware of what's good for a child with people with dyslexia is good for almost every child. So when you're thinking about staff training needs, also thinking about the whole staff body. So is it, you know, the people in the school office, the premises manager? Because when I'm asking the premises manager to lug pastel coloured paper from here to here, or to declutter a board area, it's important that he's got buy-in there and he realises why he's doing it. And then this means that the children's needs are identified and met, and not even talking about a diagnosis or a screening at this point, but just that if they have a need, if they're struggling with one particular aspect of literacy, that they're getting a little bit of support with that. And as a result, you get stakeholder confidence, you get positivity, and as a result, there's less frustration. So, and that's for, you know, the child will feel less frustrated, the parent will feel less frustrated, because they have this sense that you know what you're doing as a school, and less frustrating for the teacher, who's tearing their hair out saying, I'm not sure what's going on here, what can it possibly be, am I not doing my job properly? But an awareness that some children just do struggle more than others. And I'm just going to try to show you a video of some of our children raising awareness. So this is a group of children who all have a diagnosis of dyslexia, and they are our dyslexia ambassadors. So when it comes to Dyslexia Awareness Week, they're often heavily involved in putting together presentations. And this is a presentation they did, I think it was in 2020.
Try not to focus too much on it. Many children with dyslexia have a poor working memory. We are the Dyslexia Ambassadors.
may be a little bit biased there, but they're pretty fantastic. They were in year 4 and 5 when we took that video a couple of years ago. So getting started, really, when we think about identification, we start right at the beginning of a child's journey at the school. So even before they come into our school, we, as part of the home visits and on the admissions papers, that so they've already got their place in the school, so they don't feel like it's a condition. But we're asking families, is there any history in your family of dyslexia? Is there any history of literacy difficulties? Quite often at this stage, parents will be shy to tell us that there is any difficulty. They're not yet aware of the school's ethos and the support that we can have in place, and they feel that it might be something negative to let the school know. But as then they get to know us, they might be a bit more open about it. So yeah, we're looking even before they join the school, and then as they settle in, we're looking for difficulties with phonological awareness. And this is at a stage before they're starting to learn to read and write. So I'll just talk a little bit about phonological awareness, because it can be easily confused with all those phonological, phoneme, phonics terms. So the first thing is being able to, it's all about hearing rather than seeing. So nothing to do with what's written down, but just what they're able to hear. So it might be that a child's having difficulty remembering rhymes that you're learning as a class, or songs. So thinking about the whole sentences at that level, they're struggling at that level. And then, I mean, obviously, it's important to consider that you get some children who are coming in and they've had no exposure at home. So you may have great concerns. This child has a great big red flag for dyslexia, but actually it's due to the exposure. And once they've settled into school, once they've settled into nursery, it becomes apparent that they're picking things up quite quickly, and there's no real reason for concern. It can be the flip side as well. There may be somebody who struggles, but they've had so much exposure at home that they've developed good compensatory strategies, and it's looking like everything's okay. But then as it gets a bit more complicated, or as you introduce new rhymes, then you notice that there's a bit of a problem. So thinking about chunks in words, so still now thinking about what we hear rather than what we see. So I know I was trying to find an image here, but in the end I just had to do the cutting up of words. But can they hear that a word has got two parts to it? Spider, maybe could they clap the syllables in their name or their friends' names? And so quite often it's difficult for them to work out where the beginning and the end of the word is. And the same with sounds. So then moving from sort of sentence and text level right down into the individual sounds. So it could be alliteration, or it could be hearing the initial or the final sound in a word, that they're really struggling with that. And then, so all of the things that we mentioned above, that I mentioned above there, all pre-reading and writing. And then when we're moving on to when children start to read and write, obviously you can see then that they can't possibly be able to identify what letter to attribute, or letters to attribute to a sound, if they haven't really got the clear sounds. So, but once they've moved up to reception in year 1, these are the sorts of things that we're looking at, that they're struggling to crack the alphabetic code. So when you're doing the first 6 letters typically sat in reception, that they're really struggling to remember those. And they're just taking longer. So they might get there, but they're taking longer to learn, than they're taking longer to put together a CVC word, and longer to be able to read the words in the books than their peers typically are. Finding rhyming words, generating rhyming words, they're still having a problem at that hearing level as well, and being able to produce rhyming. And then, of course, at the end of year 1, the phonics screen. How did they get on with that? So many children will have flown through it. some children will get there with a push. And it's worth thinking about those children as well, because they've needed some additional support to get there. It hasn't come easily to them. And just to be cautious, especially at this age now, where they're moving from what they can hear to what they can see or what they're creating, there may be other things that are having an impact, such as do they need glasses? Quite often at that point, they have vision screening in the school, but if not, just make sure that that's not having an impact. The other, of course, is hearing, so glue ear, typical at this stage, and is that having an impact on why they're not learning their phonics? And other things as well, so the impact of early trauma that's making it difficult for their cognitive processes to flow fully at this point. So more experienced learners, so the grand old age of 6 or 7, these are the sorts of things that we're looking for. So an unexpected difficulty, they're very articulate, good vocabulary, and yet when they come to put pen to paper, you're surprised at what they cannot produce. Multi-step instructions, so you're constantly seeing that when everybody else has got to work, they haven't quite got there yet, and they always need somebody to go in and check on them. Is it attention? Is it working memory? Because that, as we know, is a part of the dyslexia definition. So if you have at this point put interventions in place, what's the progress like? Are they making the expected progress, or is it a bit like pulling teeth for some of those children? Might be some avoidance. They might be acting out, and so you'll notice them, but they could be zoning out, in which case perhaps they're sliding under the radar slightly, and at the end of the lesson you're kind of wondering where their work is and what's happened to them. And of course checking for co-occurring difficulties, because it's more common than we originally thought. So thinking about those other areas such as dyspraxia and ADHD and so on, so some of them are co-occurring difficulties, but some of them are different learning difficulties in their own right. So thinking about progress from interventions. We'll talk about this first. Okay, so this is, so just to be cautious as well, that even at Key Stage 2, this is a child who had developed some great compensatory strategies, often got there in the end, but I could see in her work that she was really struggling with the spelling part. And you can see how you can see the self-monitoring here, because she's going back independently, crossing out, having another go, and she doesn't quite get there. Sometimes she does, sometimes she's still miles off in the word presence, for example, lower down. But you can imagine trying to write this piece of work and constantly having to go back and thinking that's not right. So this child is very aware of her difficulties and what looks right and what doesn't look right. A constant battle for her between, do I go back and change it, or do I just carry on and get some work done? Choosing the right intervention, your first port of call would be the Education Endowment Foundation, and they look at interventions for children aged 3 to 18 years, and they're an independent charity, and their aim is to eradicate the impact of low income on educational achievements. So you'll see they have this, the implementation cost, the evidence strength, and how many years per month, how many months they think that or they have found that intervention will add on to their learning typically. So the other one that maybe is a little less well known is the Brooks. So this is specific to literacy difficulties, to struggling readers and writers. So it's the 6th edition at the moment, which came out in 2020. And this previews interventions, and it gives you so this is one example on word wasp. So it will sort of look at the pre and the post ability ages, and then it gives you this sort of summary at the end of the different areas of literacy, and what the impact is. Is it modest, useful, substantial, remarkable? So that's another good one that's updated often, and it's specific to literacy. So also to consider, this is a slide that I gave recently to a presentation to staff at an INSET. But this is around the graduated approach and how whichever intervention you're going to use. So here we use NESE quite widely, not just for dyslexic children, but for any child really who is struggling or it fits the bill for them. But thinking about how you're going to assess initially, and then how you're going to keep track of the progress that the child is making. And that can be quite difficult to tease apart what is making the difference here, because if you've got a child who is receiving excellent quality first teaching, plus they're having this intervention, plus they're having support from her home, what is it that's having the most impact there, and looking really carefully at what they're working on in the intervention to check that it's not a waste of time and there's not anything different you can be doing or different targets that you can be setting. So a little bit about screening. So this has been quite well covered by the previous speakers. So at this point, you might be asking why, what more really could a screen produce? And screens are really there to establish, is the profile of this child similar to the profile of a dyslexic pupil? So if you are, like we do in this school, if you're looking at the definition, if you have specialist teachers around to support, then they might be able to say, that this is looking like they might need a diagnosis, this maybe not. Excuse me. And deciding whether a formal diagnostic assessment is necessary. So I think at this point about information that the school already holds. So when you think about what a screen might give you, what does the school already hold? Probably more than they think. So as well as you've got teacher judgments, and then the SATs tests, so the foundation stage profile assessments, you've got the phonics screen, the key stage 1 SATs tests, as well as any response to intervention that you have. And those are things that obviously a screener is not going to be able to tell you. As well as that, accessible to school, you've got the parents' views, family history, and previous teachers maybe that you could ask what was their development like in the younger years. All of that background information you already have there. So another thing that maybe you couldn't get from a screener unless those questions are asked. And then you can also do additional checks if you want to. So a bit more of a standardized assessment for reading, or you could use, for example, a PM benchmark or running records. A standard spelling test which identifies the gaps, and you can get more of an idea of exactly what their struggles are. So what more could a pre-diagnostic screener provide when all that assessment is in place? And we've heard, and it's quite interesting hearing from the previous speakers. I was really fascinated by that reading screener and the visual, how the information that can give to you. That's something that I think is missing from a lot of what we do when we are thinking about referring for a visual difficulty. And sometimes those questionnaires that we send home to parents on visual difficulties, I think that possibly the parent is sure that the child has dyslexia and wants to give them every chance they've got of getting the diagnosis, so perhaps ticks boxes that perhaps aren't necessarily true, but something like that gives you a bit more information, so definitely worth looking into. So we've already heard, you can from free screeners to quite pricey ones, from very simple to complex, from paper-based to computer. There are so many screeners available. Some of them can give you suggestions of interventions and support for the child going forwards. So that could be useful, especially in the absence of a specialist teacher. And then finally, and we've touched on this as well, so what about those concerns that people raise that a diagnosis will benefit more affluent families? Are they justified? So what we see here at William Tyndale is that pretty much our children diagnosed with dyslexia reflect our school population, and that's in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, and in terms of social deprivation measures. But I think if it was left just to the parents to source a diagnosis or an assessment, it would be our more affluent families, because even though we have lots up and running in the school, we sometimes a parent still chooses to have a private assessment, but they are obviously the parents who could afford it. So something to think about, that if you are going to refer children, thinking about those children who wouldn't be able to afford it otherwise. And thank you for listening. I don't know if anybody has any questions right now, or maybe you want to save some for later.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was really, really interesting. And what was lovely when I came into the school to give that initial training, when I went back, I could see how much you'd implemented in the school in terms of your signage and paper and everything like that. So it was really great to have that validation that you'd all been listening. So,
but I think to us it really made sense, and it made a real difference to the children. It made a difference to the staff. It just sort of flagged up. What we and a lot of the things we were doing already, but didn't realise necessarily they were dyslexia friendly. So it's giving staff as well the confidence that what they're doing is a good job. Definitely.
And the other thing is, I at the Dyslexia Show, I had the opportunity to speak to Andy Cook, who is the chief executive of Helen Arkell, and they have got some money for bursaries for assessments. I don't know what their criteria is. I don't know the geographical area, but they're based in Farnham in Surrey. But if anyone has got anybody that they want to put forward, try Helen Arkell. As I say, they may have criteria and things like that in place, but they've definitely got some money. So
brilliant. Yeah, it's good news. I had heard that Helen Arkell were doing, that there were routes in that way, and I don't know how. I'd like to find a bit more about it, but one of our parents recently found a grant for a laptop for their child through a charity. So I only met her recently in a group, so she was a bit reluctant to sort of say where she'd found it or how it happened, but I'll try and get that information from her.
I mean, the other place to try is maybe one of the local dyslexia associations. They sometimes have little pots of money. Oh, Fiona's saying that she works for Helen Arkell and can give more information. Fiona, do you want to put your microphone on? And Teresa's saying local dyslexia associations can sometimes subsidise assessments. So she's Shropshire Dyslexia Association. Oh, your mic is disabled, Fiona, but stick it on the chat, and or give your email and we can signpost people to you.
I've just enabled the microphone for the person who wants to speak.
Fiona,
they should be able to unmute it. Is it letting you do it?
Okay, perfect.
Hello,
Hi.
Teresa.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, no, hello, Fiona.
Hi, I don't know why my name's coming up as Fiona, it's Laura. I work for Helen Arkell as a specialist teacher, and they do indeed have bursaries for tuition and for assessment. They're very flexible about how they award the bursaries. Sometimes it's means tested to a degree, but they like to look at it on a case-by-case basis according to need. So it's really worth having a look at their website if anybody's interested in that. So they do the specialist teaching and the assessments as well.
That's fantastic. And the specialist teaching, some of it is online as well, so it doesn't matter if you can't get into Farnham either, does it?
Yeah, I'm a long way from Farnham, and
Oh.
I've just started doing remote tuition for them.
Right.
So they do remote tuition across the country, and
Yeah.
what I'm trying to do, I'm based up in Cheshire, and I'm just starting to establish some work for Helen Arkell up in this area and across Cheshire as well.
Fantastic. Oh, well, it's nice to hear that that you're reaching out, and excellent. Teresa's asking, are the assessments for all ages, or do they prioritise primary?
For Helen Arkell, I think they do all ages. I'm not sure about adults, but they certainly do secondary as well. Yeah.
If for adults, I'm a trustee of the Adult Dyslexia Centre, and approach them. They are adc.org.uk. So, and Jeff, we've got Jeff coming on this afternoon, who's also a member of SHADA, which is the St Helens Local Dyslexia Association as well. So, you know, there are a lot of them around, and they may have little pots of money to subsidise things.
It would be very nice if the lady who spoke last made contact with the Teachers Association, because they're very concerned about you know, so the availability of assessments. I certainly will pass it on to my colleagues in the St Helens and Greater Merseyside group.
Yeah, I do. I work part-time at a school, and that's in Warrington, so that's not too far from St Helens.
Yeah.
Shall I email you, Katrina, and then you can
Please
pass
do.
it on?
Please do. Yes, excellent. No, this is why these occasions are so lovely, to share information and really get to know each other. So thank you so much, Laura.
Great, thank you.
And any other questions for Claire? It's wonderful when I met the ambassadors at your school, it was lovely that you'd given them that status, and they all felt so proud about their status, didn't they, Claire?
Yeah, I think the highlight for me was when one of the girls in that clip actually said to me, I love being dyslexic. And, she was going to secondary school. She said, I'm going to really miss it here. I've loved being dyslexic at this school. Yeah, so I did a little chat with them. I gave them all diaries with as they left for secondary school, with the dates of Dyslexia Awareness Week in, and the details of the SENCo in their school, or somebody who they could go to start to talk about possibly carrying the work on. I don't know how successful anyone's been yet.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. They're really, really lovely. Yes, and yeah, I mean, hopefully they love being dyslexic in the next school as well. So that's great. So, any other questions for Claire? Luckily, you haven't been. No one's walked into your office, have they? While you've been speaking.
I know it was a bit of a concern. I've heard a few people go past, a few little taps on the door, because children are just used to wandering in when they feel like it sometimes. But and staff. The big sign on my door right now.
And as you were saying, you're very lucky to have 2 specialist teachers in your school. Not many schools have that at all, do they?
No, exactly. And you know, we had one specialist teacher, and she was on long-term leave, and it really showed us that we needed her. And so it sort of prompted me to do the MA as well, so that I had a bit more knowledge about it. But it makes the world of difference to a school, I think, to have a specialist teacher.
Absolutely. I think
more schools should have them, shouldn't they, Katrina?
Shouldn't they? Yes.
Yeah.
Or at least the HLTA trained to a certain level. I think that that might be the way forward as well. So yes, well, we had Aaron had Matt Hancock open his show at the weekend, so things are starting to move, aren't they?
Yeah, and if you look at the green paper that's just come out, and the white paper, there is still there is an emphasis on early identification. Yeah. I don't think it's not strong enough yet, but we need to. But I think people need to, the green paper is there for people to comment on until the 1st of June. So comment on it and get that and get your comments back in to try and move things forward. But that is the thing. So yeah, so that is that's a good thing to do. It is.
Definitely. Excellent. So any other comments from anybody? The other things would be really interesting to know what kind of background people are from. You know, are they in schools? Are they thinking about doing any training? Have they done the training? So do let us know a bit of background about yourselves as well. And lovely to hear from Laura as well. Excellent. Well, we can always go to lunch a little bit early, and I'm sure that we can try and come back a bit earlier, because I'm sure there'll be lots of questions later on. So shall we head for lunch?
Yeah, and then we should be back in about an hour and 5 minutes.
Yeah. And any questions during that time, just put on the chat room, and we will see you in an hour's time. Yeah, well, thanks very much. Thank you.
Right, I'm going to leave.